right, let's start the meeting. It is 7:17. Call to order, flag salute.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Okay, we have a consent agenda for the Housing Needs Analysis Advisory Committee minutes dated February 12th.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we approve the minutes.
Okay, second. Okay, it's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Nay?
I abstain, I wasn't here for the meeting.
Okay,
Same.
very good. Passed. Planning Commission minutes dated February 12th.
So moved. Either approved?
Approved? Okay. It is approved, seconded and approved. You weren't here.
I also abstain. 'Cause I wasn't
Same here.
And you
Abstain.
abstained?
Yes.
Okay.
And you weren't either.
I don't get to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have any topics from the floor that is not about the hearing tonight? None. Okay, hearing none. Okay, we have a variance at 1160 and 1170 Deer Island Road, Frank. It is now 7:19. And the public hearing is now open. This is a quasi-judicial land use hearing. The subject of this hearing is a request for a variance. Subject property is identified on the county assessor's map as Lot 500, map 5N1W-33DB. The applicant is Peter Frank. The owners are Peter and Elaine Frank and Leslie Everett. Because the quasi-judicial proceedings require observance of certain procedural formalities, we will take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the commission wish to declare ex parte conflict or conflict of interest or bias in this matter?
No.
Hearing none. Does any member, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, does anyone from the audience object to the ability of a commissioner to make a fair decision? Seeing none. Generally, the order of the proceedings will be as follows: required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, neutral testimony, those opposed, rebuttal by the applicant, final questions, close of the record, deliberations, and decision. The following statements are required to be made at the commencement of the hearing pursuant to City Code ORS 197.7635. The following is a list of applicable substantive criteria for this decision. St. Helens Municipal Code 17.108.0501, criteria for granting a variance. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria described or other criteria in the plan, such as a comprehensive plan or land use regulation, such as that is found in the development code, which the person believes applies to the decision. Failure to raise an issue, including constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions or approval in this hearing, in person or in writing, or failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority an opportunity to respond to the issue, precludes appeal to LUBA, the Land Use Appeals Board. On that issue, and precludes an action for damages in certain court. All right, Jacob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a property that probably doesn't need any introduction. There was a zone change on this a while back from industrial to apartment residential, if you recall. And then in the planning director decisions, you probably saw a land partition application, a preliminary plat. So since the partition, they also submitted a site development review to build a triplex, which our code explicitly and clearly in black and white defines as a multi-dwelling development. And so the multi-dwelling provisions apply. And in that site design review, we ran into an issue with one of the specific standards that applies to development, multi-dwelling developments for the distance of windowed rooms from walkways, parking lots, and such. Unique property, I'll cover that. There was a dwelling there in a duplex built in 38 and 42. The dwelling burned, and so it's no longer a dwelling, it's just a shell now. And so they want a higher use of the property, and so they successfully had the zone change and want to put a triplex on there. So the particular stipulation in the code is on page 2, and what it says is driveways, parking lots, and common or public walkways shall maintain the following separation within 8 feet of ground level, and that's an important provision. So if these were second-story units, it wouldn't apply. But the idea is that when you have ground units, for a quality of life perspective, there is some sanctity maintained by making sure that you have some separation requirements. And in this case, working with the applicant and their architect, it was it's always a puzzle, but it was a pretty tight fit to get everything to work. And so when we ran into this, they decided to see if they could get a variance, and so that's why we're here today. I put a little table there on page 2, which kind of highlights what the standard would be, and the standard differs depending on whether or not it's a living room on the other side or not. It's a little higher standard for living rooms. We did cover these for the large apartment complex. There was some cases where they didn't quite make it. If you recall, there was, of course, a lot of details in that one, the 204 unit one. And one of the things we talked about was, if you didn't have windows, it wouldn't matter. But then you're getting into the city standards for crime prevention, and parking lots tend to be a higher crime area. So you want to have windows on the parking lot for those reasons, and people like to have windows too. And so just eliminating the windows didn't seem like the best, at least first take to try to resolve it. So as usual with the variance, we have a lot of standards. And interesting, we have these themes, and tonight's theme is single-story residential construction, because both public hearings kind of pertain to that. So I'm not going to cover all the criteria, but I do want to cover some highlights. And the first one is it will not be detrimental in its overall purposes of the code. These purposes are quality of life. And I think one thing that helps is that it is only a 3-unit complex. If this was a 50-unit complex, there would be a lot greater chance of interruption because there's going to be a lot more people. In this case, it's 3, and given that a couple sides are industrial property, you probably won't have apartments beyond in the foreseeable future, and so that helps. I also talk about the crime prevention thing and that standard. So the other thing that you need to be able to hang your hat on is single-story construction, and the applicant makes some arguments for that. This is a variance because of its small scale and because of its adjacency to the transit center and in arterial street. We it's an appropriate place for higher density development. It's not something that gives me a lot of heartburn, and so it is something I could get behind. But other than that, if you have any questions for me, we can get on with the testimony.
I have 2 questions. First of all, I always like to know giving this variance, what does it do to our rules in the future? How do we handle somebody else that comes in that wants?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think that
So-
the circumstances, I mean, the important thing is to be able to make findings on unique circumstances. And there's enough history on this one, given the zone change, the non-conforming two structures, the fact that it is by the transit center, that you can make arguments that you want a higher standard. And I don't know if this situation is going to be easily replicated. And so that doesn't, make the hair on my neck raise too bad.
My second question is what you brought up, the fact that it is near a well-used road, the transit center. Does that and the fact where the windows are being proposed, will that adversely impact the residents living in those units because of that more noise from the road, from the transit center across the street, from the lights from the transit center? I know they have additional lighting in that. What impact does that have on the specific units by moving those windows?
This doesn't, Jenny, I want to get to the site plan. So the windows in question are not along Deer Island Road. Rather, they are along the driveway, which is somewhat perpendicular to Deer Island Road. And so, yeah, I wish this laser pointer worked on this.
Never used a mouse for a laser pointer.
This is the walkway in question.
Okay.
So that's the walkway, and then you have various windows facing that, and the parking lot, and then the driveway where it's less than the standard. It's that's not too much. It's mostly the walkway and the parking, but it's basically this area, not this
Okay.
area.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for pointing that out.
It's the other building that's there already. The house, I think. Can't remember. Jordan. Maybe it is a duplex. I think it's a duplex.
Any more questions?
No.
Yeah, it's a duplex.
Oh, you're done? Okay. Can we hear from the applicant?
Can you state your name for the record? Thank you.
And biggest discrepancy that we have here really, from my perspective, is where the center part of the development faces the parking spaces. The difference we're talking about is 3 feet, I believe, in violation of the code, because those are not living room windows. The majority of those are. The only two that are windows, I believe, is this one here, this one here. So one's a question along here really mostly, right?
Yeah, if page 2 has the table with the numbers.
Yeah, and those are basically non-living room windows, the majority here. This could be argued, this is a dining room area, this is a living room, this is the rear. So really we're arguing about 3 feet of space, from my perspective anyway. The walkways again though are right against the property, so there is no setback of the 5 feet in that case. And that's really where we're, and and it was originally an oversight. We had the site development review and everything else to be in conformance with this particular piece, is part of the code. So, my problem is I have no way to change that dimension on the size of this site. That's the one to make changes which, are beyond my financial capabilities. And, I think I've outlined all those arguments in my, application notes. So, I'm hoping we can make a variance for this process underway.
So when did you learn that you would not be meeting the standards for the windows? Was that,
I think it was following the site development review.
okay. So does it have something to do with the design of the building or the size of the building, or what is the?
The constraint really is the size and the space available.
Okay.
How big we can make those
All right.
parking spaces. There's not much room to move it without other constraints being violated.
I see. Okay.
If we dramatically change the scale of the building. And the whole purpose of going for the triplex is really to get as maximum density out of that.
Right.
In our means on the site we have available. So, I think we pretty much met that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Good, thanks very much. Do we have any testimony in support?
Al Peterson, 101 St. Helens Street. I'm the architect. This really came about because this is an extremely tight property. And as you can see, there's just as much square footage dedicated to driveway and parking as there is dedicated to actual buildings. And so this is one of those cases where on very tight sites, the parking becomes almost a hindrance to development. If let's pretend we did go up, 2 or 3 stories and we were able to fit more units in there, I mean, still we would have to dedicate the entire ground surface to parking in order to fit what you want in there. So really, these apartment residential zoning requirements are really meant for larger sites, and when you try to fit apartments onto smaller sites, you run into problems. That's exactly what's happening in this particular case. The other issue with this particular case happens to be that little black dot at the bottom of the drawing, which is a power pole, which caused us to have to make that little jog in the driveway. And that puts some constraints on the front of the property, and we're dealing with that. And since we're dealing with zoning, I did send you a letter a while back about this particular issue, and I think you could probably, I have a copy of what I sent you before, and it has specifically to do with duplexes in AR zones, which I think you should fix. And we can refer to my email, and I'll just leave you a copy of my email again about that. But really what occurred with this is as Jacob said, this is a very tight site, and when you have a very tight site, the puzzle becomes very complex. So we were able to work out everything, and then at the very last, Jacob said, "Oh, by the way, did you notice this thing about windows?" I'm like, "No." So we did eliminate a window that was in the parking lot from the living rooms on the north of the second unit. windows that face the parking lot, and you do not have any bedroom windows that face the parking lot. So we did the best that we could to eliminate windows which we thought were reasonable. However, as Jacob had pointed out, that one living room window is 7 feet away instead of 10 feet away. And then, of course, the kitchen and the dining rooms do face the parking lot. And as Jacob pointed out, on the flip side, you have a sentence in the code that says to provide for visual connections to for defensible space of potential crime areas, which are the parking lots. So we left the windows in the kitchen so that they could see the parking lot. We left the windows in the dining room so they could see the parking lot. And then, related to the walkway, if we were to follow the walkway rule, basically that bar in the middle, that bar of the building in the middle would basically have to be cut in half. And so there's really no way to fit this in if we were to follow that rule. So that the center unit would become unlivable, and the end units would probably, we might be able to make the end units work, but we'd have to do something drastic. So this is how we ended up. And if we shifted, we could, in theory, I didn't like this discussion, but there was some discussion, well, just move the driveway over towards that other building. Well, then, because it's an existing building, the rules don't apply. But you're basically creating the same problem, but you're ignoring the rules. Because they don't apply because it's an existing building. Well, that's not very ethical in my standpoint, just to ignore the rule because it's an existing building and it doesn't apply. So, that's where we are. Any questions?
No?
So I'm sure you made some effort moving the pole.
Yes, it's gonna cost about $8,000 to move the pole.
Okay. All right, had to ask.
Al, I had a couple questions. How big are the units?
The units, they're 2-bedroom units. I think the larger ones are 925 square feet, and I cannot remember what the middle unit is.
That's close enough. I just wanted to know, are they 600 or are they 1,400? About 900 works.
Right,
Okay, and there's 3 units total?
yes.
Okay, from I'm not an architect, I can't tell if this is a giant house or a tiny house.
No, they're just they're modest units. They're 2-bedroom units. There is washer and dryer in each unit.
No garage?
No garage.
Okay, I just get an idea for the site. Thank you.
Maybe what, and this is just an observation, maybe what happened was this is being overbuilt for the size of the lot.
You can make that argument if you want.
I'm just observing.
All right, do we have any neutral testimony? Seeing none. Do we have any opposition? Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Al. Any opposition? Seeing none. No rebuttals then, I assume. Any final questions? All right. So, we turn for deliberation? Right?
Yeah, you should probably announce the hearing's closed.
Oh, the hearing is closed, and we will go to deliberations. All right. Addressing your
For staff. I don't know
site
what it was
size, you
now.
think?
When you consider the difficulty of this particular site, the lot, being hamstrung, other than, as it was discussed in the report, The other option would be to go to a second story, which would be out of the realm of cost, prohibitive. This is probably the best option we have.
Well, and he's not starting from scratch, he's with two existing buildings,
One.
What? I don't understand.
38 and 30.
No, that has nothing to do with this because the building that was existing is no longer there. It's burned down.
All is torn down.
Yeah, so this is a brand new construction.
It's not
We-
torn down yet, but it will be torn down for this, yeah.
But, no, I mean, for the size of the lots, I mean, the developer's, hamstrung, and I guess that, that addresses the need for, a specific variance for a site.
I have a question for you, Jacob.
Sure.
Commissioner Cohen brought up, if we make this variance, how is that going to affect decisions in the future? Question I have is are the findings something that is a precedent setting, or is it a finding for this particular project? Can we put our blinders on and say, how does it apply to this project?
Well, I mean, that's, when I'm listening, I'm writing stuff down to help create the findings. But you're looking at special and unique circumstances, and it is a confined space. We've seen some triplexes, but the last one we had was built on a slope, and so the first level was just garages, and so we didn't run into this issue.
Yeah.
In this case, because it is flat, we haven't seen a lot of triplexes in the last several years. You have a lot of things that help with the precedent setting. It's Deer Island Road. It's an arterial street, so we want to consolidate the access. Al mentioned that stupid power pole that's in the way, and so that creates some inflexibility on where you put that shared access. And then if you notice those triangular shapes, those are the vision clearance areas, and so you have that to work with. And so as I was working with them, there's all these things coming in different directions and trying to get it to fit. And it's really those existing circumstances which make it unique. You have that existing duplex, so you could argue, well, why can't you just get rid of the duplex? Well, the duplex is sound, and so, why get rid of it? They do have to partition it because of the way our rules work. But I think there's enough existing physical circumstances that are unique to this property, which help with the precedent aspect.
Well, I think each project is so different, you can't set a precedent on each unique aspect of the project, so I don't think that'd be something to worry about.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not worried about it.
I think it's a good project to work with all the parameters that he's got. He's pulled it off, so it's, I think it'll be a nice site and appealing. One story, great.
Can I make a motion that we grant the variance?
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor?
All right?
I
Opposed? It passes. Okay,
And then motion for signature.
so moved.
Second.
all approved?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
Okay, it's been approved. Thank you very much, Al.
And that's a wrap.
That's one down.
But you'll get a copy of the final decision and all that stuff.
Yeah. Thank you.
So for this next hearing, I do have some letters that were submitted to us after we sent packets to you, so I'm going to give you copies.
I'm good, thank you. Didn't bring any peanut butter.
Yep. I told her Carmel did.
Oh, that one did, yeah.
Oh, boy, that sprayed right on there.
Thank you.
It did. Thank you. Did you get that letter?
It's not anything to do with the last one.
Okay, well, I've still got it. You're kidding me. I know, but Wayne,
Watch it.
Jay's up.
All right.
his project.
It is now 7:49. Public hearing is now open. This is a quasi-judicial land use hearing. The subject of this hearing is to request 12 variances. Subject to properties identified on the county assessor's map is 1903, 1905, 1907, 9109, 9120, 22, 22, 24, 27, 31. Does that work for you? Okay. On the map, for N1W-BD. The subject properties identified on the county assessor's map also includes lots 7501, 7503, and 7505 on map 4N1W-BC. The applicant is Andrew Stamp. The owner is Richland American Homes of Oregon Incorporated. Because the quasi-judicial proceedings require observance, certain procedural formalities will take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the commission wish to declare ex parte conflict of interest or bias in this matter? Hearing none. Let's see. Does anyone from the audience object to the ability of a commissioner to make a fair decision? Seeing none. Generally, the order of proceedings will be as follows. Required statement, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, neutral testimony, those opposed, rebuttal by applicant, final questions, close of the record, deliberations, and decisions. The following statements are required to be made in the commencements of the hearing pursuant to City Code ORS 197.7635. The following is a list of applicable substantive criteria for this decision. St. Helens Municipal Code 17.108.050. Criteria for granting a variance. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria as described, or other criteria in the plan, such as comprehensive plan or land use regulation, such as that found in the development code, which the person believes applies to the decision. Failure to raise an issue, including constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval in this hearing, in person or in writing, or failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority an opportunity to respond to the issue, precludes appeal to LUBA, the Land Use Appeals Board, on that issue, and precludes an action for damages in certain court. Okay, Jacob, you have a report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So these are 12 variances for 12 specific lots of the Emerald Meadows subdivision. Richmond American Homes has purchased a good portion of those lots. They haven't purchased all of them. And there is a map that shows which lots these apply to. And the way Richmond American Homes works is they have a handful of house types that have some customization options. And two of those house types are single story. And in exploring our code, they ran into an issue with our building and structure lot coverage, which is 35% for detached single-family dwellings. And what they're seeking is a variance on select lots to have the possibility of having one of their two single-story models for customers. So they're not asking for all lots. It's 12 because it's 12 variances. And the variance, as requested, is as much as 7%. There is a table in there that kind of shows the lot coverage variance requested based on two of the single-story models. There's the Amethyst model and the Onyx model, and there's the table up there. The Onyx is slightly bigger. And with these variances, the way I always look at it is, well, am I making a recommendation with a clear conscience? Believe it or not, I have a conscience with my job.
Really?
So that's always kind of the test for me. And in looking at this, the thing that helps me with some comfort is their single-story homes are around 20 feet in height. And if we have one of our conditions that says it's specific to these models, basically you're trading some building height for some increased lot coverage. I think that condition is very important, so it couldn't be used for just anything. And so that's why there's one of the conditions in there. Just to make sure you understand the provision that we're talking about. Of course, we're zoned R5, and there's a provision that says buildings and structures shall not occupy more than 35% of the lot area. There's some different standards for attached dwellings and multi-dwelling units, but the type of residential use here is detached single-family dwellings. So basically, the footprint of the building and structures are all defined in the code, should not exceed 35%. It's a rule that's been in place for literally decades. Because I remember when a builder asked me about it several years ago, I looked into it, and I went pretty far back to see where that standard came from. So it's been around for a long time. So when we're considering all of the standards, we can look at some of the conditions to see how I'm kind of thinking about this. Of course, condition 1, the variances are for a limited time, and that means you have to get your building permit in while it's still valid, or get a time extension. The second one talks about the building and structure coverage allowed by lot, and the idea is we would attach this table that was up there to the final decision, so it's clear on what we're doing. And then it's specific to the Amethyst or Onyx model. The reason you do that is these land use decisions stay with the land. And so what we wouldn't want to have happen is for it to be vague as far as what the increase is applying to, and then Richmond American says, well, we don't like the St. Helens market, we're going to run, and some other builder gets it and then has for example, a 35-story house. Well, I have this variance, why can't I have the lot coverage? So that's why it's based on Richmond American's approach where they have these models. It's very specific to these models, and so we want to tie that in with the decision. Now, some things to consider are the, is the maximum extent of the law being applied? Are they asking for more than they should? And I think this is one of those things that you can kind of start thinking about. So if you look at the table, the amethyst has a range of 1 to 4%. The onyx has a range of 4 to 7%. And there's a lot of argument in both the testimony provided and in the application by the applicant that argues for, single-story structures in various lots. Creates a variety, keeps things interesting, and looking how Richmond American Homes does things, if they build out the subdivision, I do think it'll be an attractive subdivision, and I think we're lucky that they're building there. But the one argument that I'm not sure of is the amethyst versus the onyx, because the single-story argument's pretty strong, but why would you choose the onyx over the amethyst? And it's just a question of, do you want to get, how fixated do you want to be on the amount of variance request? Do you think 7% is fine? And if you do, then you could approve it as requested because that's the greatest percent being asked. If you're questioning that, then okay, well, what number do you pick? And if I was going to make a recommendation, if this is a concern that you have, our code has an allowance for building additions. So let's say you have a building that's built at 35%, a couple of years down the road, they want to build an addition for an auxiliary dwelling unit or another bedroom or something like that. The code has an allowance to increase the lot coverage for 5% for building additions. And so if you look at the first criterion, it talks about consequences of the code. If you stay within that 40%, that's pretty easy to meet because you're just saying, okay, well, we'll give you that bump out now. That would limit the lots that the onyx would be possible on because you see a lot of those percentages exceed 5%. Mm-hmm. And I'm not necessarily saying you would go there, but if you're thinking about, some of the standards, are the standards being met to the maximum extent possible and things like that, that is a place you can go. I don't have much more to say other than that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of testimony on this one, so.
Does the request for the variance, does that have an impact on any of the setbacks?
No, not at all. In fact, they're careful to say that they're not asking for any change in the yard requirement, and I'm sure there's a lot of argument in there, and I'm sure they'll talk about that at length.
Just the overall use of the land.
It's the building and structure coverage only. That's the only standard. They're not asking to encroach on variances. They're not asking for exceptions to parking. They're voluntarily, well, given the conditions, assuming they agree with it, restricting the building height for those to about 20 feet. The one is 18, but more or less 20 feet. And so it's kind of that trade-off of building height versus lot coverage. Now, if we had a more sophisticated code that dealt with floor area ratio, they may not need the variance because that lets you play with that stuff. But our code doesn't work like that. It's lot coverage is a separate issue, building height is a separate issue. And so because of that, that's why they had to apply for these variances.
Now, does this count the patio?
A patio is not a structure.
I understand that, but
But no, that's an excellent question. So the other separate standard in our residential zonings is maximum impervious area. Mm-hmm. And they're not asking for a variance to that either. Pretty much in our zoning districts, that's 25% across the board. And so it'll say minimum landscape 25%. And so when we look at a building plan, I've never had an issue where, we've had a fight over the 25% rule.
Well, I'm just wondering because of when Randy May came in, when they were building that house and wanted a larger patio.
It may have been, well, I mean, if the patio is more than 30 inches above grade, then it can potentially be considered a structure. But your typical flat work, no, that's not gonna apply.
I was asking.
But if the patio is covered, now that's a structure. It adds to your footprint.
Okay.
There's a couple that are covered.
Jacob, are we dealing with this as a block unit, or are we doing individual?
Well, these are 12 variances.
Civil law.
So the way it's structured is we're covering it all at once. Now, the reason I added the file numbers to the table was because maybe we have a lot of testimony over lot 16, and I'm just picking a random number, and a lot of neighbors come out say, well, I live by lot 16, and dang it, if this happens, So
We're doing it as a block.
potentially there's testimony or other things that make you consider, well, I don't know about lot 16, but the other ones are good. So we have it structured as a group. But if you feel the need to look at specific lots, we can certainly do that.
I want to draw your attention to page 4 of the narrative by the city planning staff. And I want to ask a question about number 3 of the different proposals. The number 3 says grant the variance but with the cap. For example, grant the variance is requested but not exceed 4%, as you were saying. It would include all the Amethyst models as well as 3 of the Onyx. So how many Onyxes would be left out? Because I'm not sure how.
Well, 3 minus 9 is, or 3 minus 12 is 9.
No, because Amethyst takes up so many.
Well, so if you go to the table, and this is kind of what I was talking about there, and in the rule, the example that I gave orally was 5%.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't thinking about that when I wrote the report of the 5% bump. The 4% was just kind of a random thing as an example. I thought about that later. If you felt like 7 was too much, then what number do you pick? And I think based on that bump provision that we have, 5 would be appropriate.
So are you saying that the developer has not proposed specific designs for each of the lots? They're just saying that it's going to be one of these 2.
Right.
It may be one of these 2. They're looking for options. They want to make sure that if they get customers that want single-story dwellings,
These are the only 2.
that I think these are the only 2 that they offer. I mean, I believe there's a representative
cookie
from them.
Right. They're cookie cutters, basically.
Yeah, they have a handful of models. 2 of them are single-story. Our lot coverage standards don't work well with their single-story.
Right.
They do have a building permit for 1.
Mm-hmm.
They would like to have options for more, thus these variance requests.
I understand. I'm on the same wavelength.
Okay, could we hear from the applicant now?
Would it be okay if I used some chairs and to hold up our,
Whatever you need.
okay. We're not hurting for space here tonight, so.
While he's doing that, you can introduce yourself. Yeah.
I'm Kelly Tago with Richmond American Homes.
Could you spell your last name?
TAGA.
Thank you.
members of the planning commission, my name's Andrew Stamp. I'm a land use attorney in Lake Oswego. My address for the record is 4248 Galewood Street, Lake Oswego, Oregon, 97035. And your address for the record?
Is 402 West 8th Street, Vancouver, Washington, area code 98660. Area code, zip code, sorry.
So, as staff was discussing, thank you very much for the staff report. Did an excellent job. We're seeking a variance to the 35% lot coverage standard, and that's one of your standards in the code, found at section 1732-74J. And what we're really hoping to do, as was pointed out, is we're seeking some flexibility to meet a market, what we perceive and hope is a market demand for single-level units. And what we decided, we met with staff, and we decided that, you know, if we would ask for 12 of the 44 units, roughly 25% of the units. So we didn't ask for all the units. We didn't ask, and you know, that we thought that was a good compromise. And that's of the 44 units that Richmond American has bought from the original developer, Mr. Wygant, who's here tonight. And the reason for that is, as we're not a custom builder, you know, Richmond American builds homes that have some options to them. For example, bump outs for, you know, you can get same model will have a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, but they're not custom, they're spec homes. And the idea with a spec home is that you design these homes with a lot of common elements in them, so that once you hire your contractors and the people that are actually building them, they can start building them very quickly and efficiently. It's not like a custom home where they're sitting there reading the plans all day and figuring it out. Once they figured out one home, the others go in rapid succession, and it's very efficient, and that's how they're able to keep costs down. It's not assembly line, but it's a hybrid. And so the architects that design these homes, you know, design them with these common elements in mind. And what they did here is they designed 2 single-level homes. And we put pictures of these homes in the exhibit so that you could take a look at them and kind of get a sense of what they look like. And so, you know, we believe there's a market demand, an unmet market demand in St. Helens for these single-level units. They appeal to 3 different customer bases. The first is baby boomers. These are oftentimes folks that are downsizing. They've raised a family. You know, they're getting up in their years. They don't want to have stairs in the house because it's difficult to go up and down stairs. And they also appeals to family with young children for the same reason, don't like stairs. And then also millennials and first-time home builders are often if they came to Richmond American Homes' offices and looked at the plans, one of the things they find out is that the Amethyst and the Onyx are 2 of the most affordable plans. And oftentimes when you're buying your first house, you know, you're looking at whatever the lowest price one is, because you're like, oh, I hope I can make that. I mean, that's when I bought my first home, that's where I was. And I bought a home that was very similar to one of these plans, a single story, and that was all I could afford. And so, you know, that's really, there's a lot of market demand that is there for these homes. Now, one of the things we see, this chart right here shows the activity for single level homes in St. Helens over the last year. This is from January 2018 to January 2019. And in comparison, this is the activity for 2-story homes. We see, just based on those 2 charts alone, we see there's a lot less movement in the single family developments. The single level developments. And that tells us, among other things, and not only that, but from what people have told us, that we really want to be focusing on providing that option to people. Now, as staff pointed out, we're still proposing to comply with all the setbacks that are applicable in the zone. And we're gonna comply with the building height requirements. So the view from the front yard of the street will be the same regardless of, you know, whether it's approved or not. It's not, we're not gonna be any closer to the road, we're not gonna go any higher, anything like that. And this depiction right here is showing more or less the difference between what a streetscape looks like when it's comprised simply of two-story homes versus some intermixed single-level homes in there. What we're seeing on below is kind of what it would look like if the variance got approved. This is what the streetscape would look like if we have to go with the more conventional option, which is the two-story home. Not a lot of difference. Really what we're trading off here is we're bringing the house down, but we're really bumping it out a little bit more in the backyard. So that's kind of the trade-off. So we're going down in height, single story, but backyard will be a little bit smaller. And, you know, but still with the 15-foot rear yard setback, which will still apply. We think in Oregon, you know, that's a trade-off that a lot of people are willing to make, given that it's rainy and, you know, backyard's kind of useful for half the year and half not. With regards to lot coverage, one of the things that we had to think about when we were addressing the approval criteria is what is the purpose of the lot coverage standard? And the code doesn't really tell us exactly what the specific purpose is for the city of St. Helens. Why was it put in the code? But we summarized 5 what we think are the typical reasons. The first is, you know, lot coverage is to control the visual appearance of the structures of a lot in terms of volume, bulk, and massing. And it does that by limiting the amount of area on a lot or parcel covered by the primary structure. So, you know, if you can only use 35% of the lot for a structure, that's going to leave you with a more spacious field. And it doesn't create a situation where you have this McMansion that doesn't look like it's correct for the lot, like you're stuffing too big of a house on too small of a lot, is one way of putting it. And it also correspondingly provides more open space and recreational space on the lot for use by the lot owner, and it creates more green appearance and natural appearance. You know, it's just less cluttered. As Jacob mentioned, it has a side effect of limiting the amount of impervious surface on the lot, even though that's not probably the purpose, but as a secondary effect, it probably does. So again, it has some effect on that as well, even though you have a different standard to apply that. So really that's what we're talking about here, we think. I mean, you could tell us as the planning commission what you think it means, but we think that more than likely the purpose of the code was to prevent you from putting too big of a house on too small of a lot to make it look packed in. And I think looking at these landscapes, we've tried to approximate the setbacks between the house. I mean, this is obviously not scientific, it's not to scale, but we think it's a pretty close approximation of what the actual streetscape would look like, given the 5-yard setbacks on the side. Now, the question can be asked, you know, before I go there, let me talk about the mechanics of lot coverage. So just from the technical side of things, a lot coverage standard of 35% is for a single family residence. Duplexes are allowed in the zone, and if you put some sort of attached product or a duplex or something like that, then it's 50% lot coverage. So that gives you, the code says that if you're going to do attached product, that you can actually bump it out more than you can if you do a single family. And I'm not really sure what the reasons for that is, but that is what the code says. Now, let's talk about 35% on a typical 5,000 square foot lot, which is what we're in the R5 zone. That means that 1,750 feet can be occupied by a structure. And as Jacob mentioned, that's not just the primary structure, but that could include other things like a fort, you know, a tree house, an accessory building, a swimming pool, There might be any number of different things that could trigger the lot coverage standard. But putting that aside, just say for the primary structure itself, you have 5,000 square foot lot, you have 1,750 that can be occupied. And that means correspondingly that 65% of the lot must be a yard, driveway, or sidewalk, or something along those lines. Now, if you add a two-car garage, that basically means you're only left with about 1,300 feet of living space for a single-family house. And that's just a little bit smaller than what these two plans are. And that's why we're hoping to go get these variances. It's not that much of a variance. Like I said, Amethyst is 2-3%, and then the larger one, the Onyx, is up to 7%, depending on the lots themselves. We put that in a chart in our application. Matter of fact, I'll point that out to you if you want to go reference the chart. It is on page 8 of the application. So, if you're at that 1,300 square feet, the question is, well, why don't you just build a 1,300 square foot house? Okay, valid question. And we just don't see there being as much demand based on what we've seen in the RLMS for these smaller homes. Most of the homes that are selling are larger. And you also get to the problem where there's an efficiency problem, because you pay a fixed amount for the land, you pay a fixed amount to build out the infrastructure, the sewer, the water, the streets. And then if you put too small a house on it, it starts to be very expensive home for what you get for the home buyer. The home buyer, there's not the value there that I'm looking for. So the smaller you get, it becomes an issue where it doesn't really pencil for the buyer. Conversely, you get to the 1,200 square foot area, then you're really talking a townhome product. You're attached at that point. That's a typical townhouse or an apartment style building. And those can come in at a much cheaper price, or a condo or something like that. And so there becomes this area between 1,200 and 1,400 where the market just sort of disappears. And most people just want to bump up to the 1,400. And that's why these plans have been engineered to kind of meet that market demand. So the next question is, what are the alternatives to this variance? Because that's the first thing that we thought about. Well, because you never want to come in asking for a variance as your first option. You really try to think through everything else. Well, and the first option is, well, just build two-story dwellings. And that frankly is probably the plan B if this variance were to be denied. But, we really think there is a market demand for these one-story homes. They're one of the most affordable plans that can be offered, in part because they're smaller on a square foot basis, but also because you get rid of things like a staircase. You have pretty, there's some design flexibility in the way the HVAC is done. So, there's a lot of advantages to them. And as I said, there's a certain market segment that really prefers them. The second alternative, and I went through in detail in the application there, but I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but if you did, I went through about a page worth of what are the advantages of single-family homes, and I won't belabor them here tonight. Second alternative is to build that smaller one-story home. I've already discussed why that's not a great option, because you're in that dead zone between 1,400 and 1,200 where it just doesn't work as a product that people want to buy. And then third is the duplex or attached product. Now, this was something that I was involved at the city council level when Mr. Wygant was seeking the variance to go from R7 to R5. And one of the things that we heard from, we think from the planning commission, but certainly from the city council, is that there was a preference to do single family in the neighborhood as opposed to this attached product. And so, we didn't want to do a whole bunch of duplex lots just because we heard from the community So we were really trying to, we got rid of that third alternative in large measure, but not to, what we've heard, the feedback that we've got. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about these charts. Let's go with the two-story first. In this chart right here, you can see sales that occurred, and then these red marks right here are the homes offered by Richmond American. And by the way, these two right here, which are the higher priced ones, these are what are called the tuck under plans. They're essentially a 3-story house that they're designed for steep lots, and where the garage is on the bottom level, and there's really not anything else on the bottom level other than the garage. But that way you don't have a driveway that's at a very steep angle. You know how, have you ever seen houses where they have driveways that are,
Right.
horrible?
Say hello.
Yeah, there might be some here, but I personally hate them. But you get out of your car, you can't keep your door open. But what these are, unfortunately, a more expensive home to build, because it's once you go to third story, you have to do a lot more reinforcing on the ground level. They're just more difficult to build. But there's only a few of these. Do you know how many? 6? Okay, so of the 44, 6 tucked under plans. And these are all our 2-story plans. What you see here, these are other new home construction that is sold. These are other actives. And the blue, I think that's blue. I'm colorblind, it might be purple, but I think it's blue. Those are secondary markets, so they're not new homes. And this chart is very reassuring for Richmond American that they're in the right price point, because you expect the secondary market to be about a 15% less than a new home construction, because obviously the new homes have the latest and greatest, and they're new, so people pay premium for them. The more you get down here in these houses, these are typically homes that need to be updated. They're probably were built in the 70s, and they still have that orange toilet in them. And you know how that goes. Not that nothing against an orange toilet, but you know what I mean.
Ollie.
And so anyway, we can see that Richmond's coming in at a price point here that's actually less than other builders in the area, one that's really consistent right there. You also see that 1,400 seems to be about the place where the data ends. And that's because there just isn't really anything out there that's smaller than that. Now let's go to the 1-story. What you see here, a little more variation. You see our 2 units, the Amethyst and Unks. This is a little bit of an outlier here. We looked at what that was. This house sold for a very high premium because it has just gorgeous view of the Columbia River. I mean, it's right on the river. So someone paid a substantial premium for that house because of that. But you take that out, and again, what you see is fairly consistent. We have some more expensive, and it can be something special about these that make them more expensive, that make them above market. But we see this trend line is very consistent here with other new construction. And then we also see the trend line here with used market being less. So this all makes sense the way, that says that we're priced correctly. It also shows that there's a drop off here right around that 1,400 square foot with this one outlier. This person obviously they didn't want a lot of space, but they wanted to look at the Columbia, and they're willing to pay for it. So that's really our data set that we think that this makes sense to do the variance. It's the best of the 3 options that we have. Now, I wanted to address one last question in the plan, because I'll turn the presentation over. But it was regarding your question, sir, about precedent, granting a variance. Now, these are quasi-judicial land use hearings. They do not set formal precedent that another person can say, you approved Joe last week, you got to approve me. There's plenty of LUBA case law that says that one approval doesn't, mean that you have to approve the next guy. So these are, and the criteria are such, as you talked about, the unique circumstances, that's one of the criteria, is what's unique about this. In this case, I went into detail about that in our application, but it's really the combination of that L-shaped lot. It's the last lot in the neighborhood. It's a very strange lot shape, that L, and it's got the topography in it. You put those things together, and it very much limited how you could design the subdivision. And I think that's a pretty unique set of facts. But the bottom line is that it doesn't set precedent. Now, what I will say is that you should strive to interpret your code consistently. So what you don't want to do is, if you say the code means one thing, let's say there's two ways to read the code. There's an ambiguity in the code. You can read it X way or Y way. What you don't want to do is one day interpret it to mean X, and then the next hearing interpret it to mean Y, and then sort of go back and forth at random. You should strive for some consistency in how you interpret the code meaning. And then with regards to other precedent issues, there have been some cases where if a city were to routinely, as a matter of course, always go one direction with what they did, and then all of a sudden didn't give those same rights to another person for no apparent reason whatsoever. I mean, just absolutely none. There is technically a way for a person to file a constitutional lawsuit based on equal protection. It's rare, it's hard to prove, and the facts have to be just right. The one that made it to the Supreme Court was dealt with a little old lady, and the city had always granted certain permits, and then when it came time to her, they didn't grant her unless she gave them some land that they never demanded of anyone else. And that went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said it was an equal protection violation. So it's not 100% true to say that land use never forms a precedent, but it's very rare, and certainly with regards to variances, I don't think you would ever, you'd have to have a really extreme set of facts in order to trigger some sort of problem that way. So with that, I'll let you discuss some of the other aspects. The reason we separated some of this, there was some testimony that I thought would come better from the home builder rather than from me.
First, I just want to thank the Planning Commission for considering our variance. So I think in looking at it, ultimately looking at our starting price, our most affordable plans are actually the 2 single-story plans. So if you put them all in a line, they'd actually be the dots below the 2-story. So I think between the Amethyst and our next first 2-story plan is about an $18,000 difference. So it does allow us to offer the most affordable plan, offering that single-story plan. So I think that's kind of key is, we're very proud to be a part of the City of St. Helens and bringing forward some of our products, and we're very proud of the communities that we build to be able to offer personalization and really make it feel like someone's home, versus some other builders who tend to kind of build similar homes, tract homes. Even though they are the same floor plans, we really let you personalize your homes. We have a home gallery experience as part of it that lets you choose your fit and finish, so you can choose your hardwood flooring or your carpet, your countertops, your sinks, your faucets, and everything, so it truly feels like your unique home. So we're excited to bring that here. And with that, in just looking at the demand, in the prior 3 years, based on the current MLS data that was available, the prior 3 years, out of 343 homes sold, 133 of those were single-story and 210 were 2-story, which tells you that there's about a third demand there for single-story plans. In addition, if you just looked at new homes in that same period, it's about 50%. So 9 single stories and 7 2-stories, which also tell you that there just hasn't been a lot of new home single-family detached building as well. And then kind of to the point of, couldn't you just build a smaller plan to meet the lot coverage? so there's only been one, single-story plan that was built under 1,300 square feet, and only one car, so that would be the other option, don't do a two-car, do a one-car garage. So in both cases, there's only been one of those, and looking at total between new and resale, there's been 31 single stories out of 133, so about 20% that were under 1,300, and then only 23 with a one-car stall on single story. So, which just tells you that over 80% of the demand is for two-car, greater than 1,400 square foot single-story plan for those that are purchasing, interested in purchasing a single-story plan. The other thing I think that is important to consider in looking at this, when you look at the streetscape, just based on the setbacks, 20 foot to the garage and 5 on the sides, again, it's not going to change that at all. So really what we are talking about is the difference of how much of the backyard you're covering, right? Because it's coming out of this lot coverage. And what I would say is, the backyard setback is 10 feet. So if you just took the setback, your building envelope, in theory, would be 56% of the rest of the lot. So if you took 20 and 10 off of 100 is 70, and then 10 off the sides, that would leave you 40, so that's 2,800 square feet of the 5,000, which is 56%. So by doubling that backyard to 20 feet, we'd still be at 48%. And so what we're requesting in max is 42%, which means that we'll comply with all the setbacks, and you'll have at least a 20-foot backyard, no matter what, or greater, based on our lot coverage here. So it still feels like if the goal is to give a good feel and make sure that there's plenty of backyard and living space for the community, again, the front's not going to look different, and there's still plenty of backyard to be able to enjoy and use once you move in there. So I just think that's something to consider as well. But and I would also tell you, does Richmond want to do this because if you sell single-story houses, you're going to make more money? And my answer to you would be no. My margin's actually better on the 2 stories. So it's better for me to sell all 2 stories, but I don't think that's what is best for the community or the city or what the people want. And so we just want to make sure that we're meeting that demand for the city and the residents who want to live there. So with that, I'll conclude any additional points I'd like to bring at this point.
So I think that, unless there's any questions, I think that really summarizes our case in chief. I put a lot more detail in the application, but I don't want to get too wonky up here. So unless there's any questions, I think that's all we really have in terms of our putting on our case in chief.
I have just a specific question on the particular lots that are identified. Seems like a lot of them on the south side are pretty flat. Some of these along the north side have some topography issues. Are they going to work for those longer houses?
Yeah, so what we're planning on doing, and we've already permitted our one model home, but we're going to be pushing the back. We're going to flatten out the lots, and we're putting a rockery along the back. It's currently the current one that we've built is 7 feet tall, and it still affords a nice backyard, and then there's still a fence on top to give some privacy. Yeah,
Okay.
they'll be able to fit within there and still have backyard.
So why'd you pick these particular lots?
We just tried to, so for monotony purposes, right, we try not to build the same plan right next to
Yeah.
each other, and so we tried to separate it by at least alternating
Okay.
lots, is kind of how we looked at it.
All right, thanks.
And to get a little more specific there, didn't really bring a big blow up with this, but these are the really steep lots.
Yeah.
And those are the we couldn't put them there just because of the topography. And so that's why they
The
kind of
rock.
start here where there's, I think here there's, I don't know if it's 20 feet of topography or 10 or 15, but it's a lot. And then down here it's maybe, 8 to 10 here, so it becomes more feasible there. On these southern lots, they look flat from the road, but there's actually more topography than you expect. But it's really in the back area think that they'll work great on those lots, and, you know, they will create a variation in the streetscape, like we said. So, here we showed here kind of how, this is more or less what we decided here, every other lot idea. And you can see that it does have an effect on breaking up the streetscape. And there's some other examples that we saw from existing neighborhoods where they mixed the one story into the two, and I think it looks pretty good, particularly with these new homes. These new homes have a little bit of more architectural features to them than some of the other homes in the neighborhood.
So I have a question in regards to the design of the two, the Onyx and the Amethyst. Have you selected which elevation, or are you going to present all three to the prospective home buyer?
So we always let our homeowners choose which elevation. So we look at monotony. So we will never let the same plan elevation go next to each other.
Okay.
Based on how these are separated, that wouldn't happen anyway.
Mhm.
But we generally let them choose their elevation. One's considered like a farmhouse elevation, contemporary craftsman type
Right.
look with the shake and the stone, and then more of a contemporary look,
Mhm.
which is where the windows are placed. So there's kind of three different selections based on their preferences, and then we let them select that. And then the difference between the Amethyst and Onyx as well is the Amethyst by default is a two-bedroom plan. So
Mhm.
there's an optional third bedroom.
Right, saw that.
Just in that space there, whereas the Onyx is three-bedroom standard.
Mhm.
But then the gain there is there's a little tech niche by the center meet slider, so that there's still some desk/office space within the plan as well.
Okay.
So that additional like 160 square feet, that's kind of is that having that bedroom standard with that just a little bit of additional niche there is really the difference in the plans.
So what is your highest elevation in each of those two examples, the Amethyst and the Onyx? The highest elevation?
As far as the roof pitch,
You're right,
I think it's 21 feet.
for both of them?
Well, I think the
No,
Amethyst
18.
is shorter. The Amethyst is, I think, going to be about 19 feet.
Okay.
Yeah,
Total,
18
and the
something.
Onyx is going to be about 21. And it's just because of the depth of the plan, so just the truss engineering is slightly different. But I think in our two stories, it gets up to 28, 29, so there will be basically called a story, right, difference between a two-story plan next to that single-story plan.
Thank you.
Greg, on the applicants, on page 7, they give the specific heights of the Amethyst and Onyx.
All right, any other questions?
Does anyone else feel like the city council should be approving this? Because our R7 approval,
Well, you wouldn't be, yeah,
all of these would have fit. So I feel like it's the city council's job.
We have the responsibility of our variance.
well, we were overridden by city council. We were unanimous to
Stand
R7. So we go with what they chose. We're doing a lot more work now. They wouldn't even have to be here. But then Mr. Wygant wouldn't have many, more lots. So it's all, what are we gonna do?
Politics.
So here we are.
All politics, yeah.
So,
Sounds like discussion.
If I may, I got brought on board with this case after the planning commission. Wayne called me and said, hey, really didn't prepare very well for the hearing in front of the planning commission. Can you help me do a better job in front of the city council? And one of the things I almost wish that we could have gone back and presented to make our case to you, because we had a completely different case to make. The presentation we made to the city council was completely different. It was really based on housing affordability. What we showed the city council there was that the R7 zone, there was roughly about 10% of the population that's living in St. Helens that could afford an average sized home that's based on R7, based on 10 years of previous sales. So we went back and looked at every R7 lot that had been built in St. Helens, looked at the price point, and then we compared that with the last 10 years of sales of R5s, compared that price point, and then we used census data, which, may not be correct, but it's what the reported people report their incomes and stuff for the census data. We added that data and came up with about, if I remember right, it was about 10% or so for R7, and it was about 45% for R5. And I think the city council's case was ultimately made on housing affordability issues. And, you know, and I think that was a good call, I really do. I think if we were here with R7, obviously we wouldn't need the variance, and that's
That's what I
certainly true. But at the same time, I think we wouldn't have a product to sell people that live in St. Helens. And the other thing that we were able to show was we had a lot of, we did a lot of work with the people that work with rental. It was the, oh gosh, what was the name of that? Wayne, could you help me out here? The name of the group of the people that were dealing with the secondary effect on the rental market? You know, they were very, there was a group, and I'm
Community Action Team, was that who?
Yes. You know, and one of the things they pointed out to us was, look, if there's too much of a disparity between the cost of the houses that you're selling and the rental market, there won't be any secondary bump up effect from when you build new houses where some people that are renting will move up and that'll open up rental stock. But they thought with the R5 that there would be that bump up. And so, you know, we were heartened by that, and, you know, we presented that evidence to the city council, and they obviously thought that was a good thing. Like I said, I wish I could have presented that same case to you, but the way that, you know, by the time we got involved, we were already in appeal mode, so. But anyway, I guess that to some extent is water over the bridge, but I agree with your point, ma'am, that if we were R7, we wouldn't be that true. So this is somewhat of a unintended consequence of going to the R5.
So it kind of begs kind of the blunt point that Richmond American Homes bought these lots knowing there were R5 lots that all their plans wouldn't fit on. So it wasn't a surprise that they were expecting to come in with a variance.
No, it didn't turn out that way. But what happened is that once they got here, they realized, they started, you know, doing research into the community and started realizing, talking to realtors, that there was this unmet demand for single family. You know, the testimony tonight is that, yeah, we can make more money doing 2 stories. Now, you know, so this isn't an entirely selfish thing. Now,
Okay.
I'll be the first to admit that if you have a wider demand of people that you can appeal to that'll buy your product, then you'll have a quicker absorption rate, which means, you know, to some extent that could translate into more profitability because, you know, obviously the faster you sell your homes, the better, right? From a
Sure.
profitability standpoint. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there isn't some motivation to do that. But, you know, the primary motivation really is to appeal to a wider group of people that may not otherwise afford the 2-story plans. And, you know, it oftentimes only takes a $10,000 or $20,000 difference to make the difference between whether a person comes in and says they either qualify or they don't. You know, based on your income, they'll tell you, you can afford this much and not a penny more. And, you know, you're pre-qualified for, and if Richmond American doesn't offer anything in that price tag, you're out. But if they do, you're in. And so, you know, I think what it really boils down to is trying to meet the needs of the community as much as possible.
Any other questions? Okay, let's,
Yeah, and I will say, just kind of last comment there, is our first sale wasn't Onyx, one of the Rainbow plans, so,
great, thanks for your testimony.
thanks.
Thanks, sir.
Okay,
We'll leave these here in case anyone wants to reference it.
and do we have anybody in support of the application out there? Well, you've got to be in support.
I wrote a letter, I didn't make it.
I'm Jennifer Pugsley, live at 1300 4th Street in Columbia City, 97018. And I also submitted some written testimony, not thinking I could attend, but I just really want you to hear from a real estate broker with Keller Williams. I'm actually not involved in the project at all, but I feel strongly that we need more single-level homes out here. I wish they were doing more. We find a lot of the Asian community that just can't do stairs. And oftentimes they either have to make compromises and buy a house with the master on baby boomer population, and I need something to sell them. So I guess, even though I'm not involved in the project, ultimately I hope to be, to sell their product. So, been selling real estate out here for 25 years, so I think I have a really good handle on the market, and hope you consider the variances.
Great, thanks. Okay, any neutral testimony? Couldn't think of anybody out there. Anybody in opposition? I doubt that. Okay, no rebuttals. All right, the public hearing is closed. And if no further questions from the commission, public record's closed. Okay, where are we? Sorry. Okay, time for deliberation.
Well, I just want to go on record that I searched for a single-family home, my last home I bought, looks like an Asian place. And so I'm totally in support of that market, and it was very difficult to find a one-story home in this town that was for sale
Well, they're
in my range.
The market will,
Yeah.
dictates that's the way they want to do it.
Yeah, I
So,
think it's great, it's just, just this
My
variance we have to deal with.
it's the one family, one level family home.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, stairs are getting hard. How do you feel?
the side of the block.
I'm a person who thinks that my husband climbing stairs will keep him alive longer.
Or maybe not. Okay. Well, there's a view. What do you have to say? for yourself?
Crazy lady.
Okay,
I'm serious about it.
all right. Well, we put a lot of time into this subdivision in the beginning, with access, because we thought it should go out onto, is that Vernonia? Yeah, and so that wasn't allowed, but we thought so the access was an issue, and then the downzoning was an issue for us. And now we're dealing with this, which is, if it hadn't been downzoned, but then it would have less lots, so.
I guess one of the first questions to ask is going back to I guess one of the first questions to ask is going back to page 4. The staff report is, if we're going to do a variance as requested, which of the 3 would we favor? Give the variance to all 12 of the lots? Or grant ones just for the Amethyst model? Or the number 3, grant a variance with a cap, which allows a couple of onyx mixed in?
Well, they like to mix it up, so I think if you give them more of a decision to mix up the architecture,
Well, that's the question.
that would be probably,
That would be their favor, yes. What I'm saying is from our standpoint, the planning commission standpoint, which of those 3 options, if, majority of the commission agrees that, that they've proven their case as far as the variance is necessary.
I think we have to decide how important that 35% coverage is, or isn't.
Well, you have to realize they can put an onyx on all 12 lots.
true.
Or amethyst, I mean.
Amethyst,
No, onyx.
no,
Onyx is the bigger one.
They can put on all 12 lots.
only if we give a variance. That's the
Are you
question.
gonna limit how many lots they can use for what?
Well, that's the question.
Are you going through every one of those?
No.
No way.
I mean, my suggestion, my idea is, instead of giving the full plate, grant the variance, putting on a cap, which allows all of the amethyst on all the lots, but it also would allow 3 of the lots to have onyx.
And that's the one story.
So
I thought the
that's sort of the
amethyst
way
was
I'm
one
leaning.
So you're saying a 4% cap on any of the lots?
It wouldn't exceed, that's right, it would not exceed 4%.
then they can only build 3 annexes,
That's right.
and that's the one they're trying to sell the most.
I think we don't want to cut out the 3-bedroom market, just, I think it's important.
To
So
have
if-
2
if you're-
kids, you need 3 bedrooms.
If you're elderly, you're more likely to need a 2-bedroom house. If you have children, you're more likely to need a 3-bedroom house, and we really do need to have a base of houses that fit both of those, each of those groups, that, so they can find their right fit.
I agree, and just because you're elderly, I mean, just
Mike?
some parents, I mean, parents with children still, I mean, just because they might not be elderly, but they might want to have, just be able to keep an eye on their children and not have to have their children go up and downstairs too. So,
Well, even the elderly babysit.
yeah, so.
Like I said, you're limiting them to 3 of the Onyx, 3 1-story. If you go
I'm not
with
inclined to do
4%.
I'm not
So,
inclined to do the
Are
cap.
you gonna give them carte blanche
I'm
to
not,
do whatever they want to? And go with 7?
That's what I would do.
yeah, me
I
too.
make a motion that we give them the 7% period down the road. Let the individual owners decide what they want, where they want to put whatever. And that we give them the variance with 7 feet.
So we have a motion.
She just made it.
I just made it.
I'll
need
Go ahead,
second.
it. Got
I'll
a
second
second?
it.
All those in favor of having a 7% variance request on all lots? Is that correct?
So I'm gonna,
Or
so what I'm hearing would be your motion would be the variance as requested, because what we would do is attach this table
Yeah.
to it with the conditions as written. You know, I have some of those alternatives written in red
Yeah.
to help guide. And so I'll go through those with you again.
7 feet.
Yeah, so the first one is the limited time thing. So just be aware that, you know, variances don't last forever. The second one is, you know, it says the coverage may be increased per the table.
Yes.
So we get attach the table to the final decision. So all those numbers are there. So when the building permits come in, we look at it and go, oh man, that's 37%. Oh, we have a variance for it. Okay, that's okay. Move on. Condition 3 is that they only apply to the Amethyst and Onyx detached single-family dwelling as identified in the record.
Correct.
That's for me to be comfortable with it. I think that condition is important. That way, someone can't run off with it. It's specific to their request, not, you know, any model. And then the fourth condition is just a typical, you know, they're still responsible to comply with the development code except for the variances.
And that is specific to the builder too, right? So if they ended up selling,
No, so land use decisions say stay with the land. And that's why condition number 3 is very important. Because if they sell it, we're saying, okay, this is specific to these models.
I understand it.
It's not even specific to that size of a home, but these models.
These models, yeah.
Wanna
So
put that
you-
back?
So the motion would be as recommended by staff.
So I have,
I'm just trying to make your life a little easier.
I have a motion and a second. I just need a vote.
Okay, do we have a vote as recommended by?
But it doesn't have those conditions on it.
Conditions as recommended.
Yes.
That's what she
You're
said.
adding after the motion's been made.
She didn't specify. She just said a motion to approve.
Approve what?
Well, you
the
started talking
variance.
about 7%
Request
for
7%.
But not the
30%.
condition.
for the works.
Oh, you
Yeah, so I interviewed because
I gotcha.
I wanted to make sure the
You
motion.
had a motion that-
So do we still
Well,
understand
no,
that?
for the table, you meant.
The conditions are
For
not.
some are.
So do we still understand that number 3, what you've written in there?
Because it's,
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, I understand it, I wrote it.
Well, no,
Yeah, but that
wanna
could be
make sure
three, or
that
you could make a house
that's
bigger.
answered in the
That's a lot.
motion.
Only for the,
Okay.
Yeah, if it's as recommended by staff would capture those.
specifically
Wow.
to this.
Table.
So you have the motion, you may want to take care of that and then re-motion just to make sure we're clear.
Well, I think we need to just clarify that. I think it is per staff's recommendations and the conditions.
Russ, that's not on that motion. You're gonna need an additional motion or a withdrawal of the motion that was made.
I'll withdraw the
Okay.
motion and rephrase.
Second has to be
Okay, that's withdrawn.
Withdraw.
Okay.
Okay. We give a variance up to 7%, dependent on the, what would you call it?
The table,
with the
chart.
attached condition.
Style of home. Is that how?
Yeah, if you just,
No.
because the conditions, the way you're going is the conditions that are built into this.
Condition.
So as recommended by staff, including the conditions, then you're
That's
covered.
recommended.
I second.
How's that?
Is that clear? Okay. You seconded.
Mhm.
All in favor of this?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Three.
So,
Did you
on
vote?
the
You're the vote.
tiebreaker, I
Yes or
would
no?
like to hear why the people have said.
No,
no.
the chairman,
Can't do that.
Can't.
chairman is the
Well,
tiebreaker if there's a tie.
There isn't. It's 4, was it? Oh,
Aye.
it's 3-3.
Are you voting, we're voting no. Your aye is coming in as a yes or a no.
It's a yes.
There you go.
Yes, yes.
It passed.
Okay.
Yes, there's no
Four,
tie.
2
4-2.
in favor.
Yeah, 2 opposed.
2 opposed.
We were opposed.
And opposed.
Yeah.
Yeah. 4 in favor,
Now
2
you can
opposed.
ask.
There you go.
Well, it's,
We're on top of it. We know what we're doing.
I know what you, keep me. well,
Have a motion for the chair to sign the letter.
Second. Well, I don't know. Can I do that?
You can- you vote.
I don't know.
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's a procedural thing. Done.
Yeah, so get done with it.
You got to do it.
Not opposed. All in favor. Passes. Okay. Great. Thanks very much for coming.
Since no one was opposed, there's probably no appeal. Do you mind if we just take these, or do you want to have them for the record? I don't think you really need them. They're duplicates of stuff that's in the record.
Yeah, it's in the record.
You don't want them. They make great shooting targets.
There you go.
Well, there's a
Mr.
couple
Chairman.
people.
I was going to
wanna-
say that, but I thought it would be inappropriate. I do have a question for you, Andrew. Onyx and amethyst, is that a rock or a mineral?
Oh, to him it's gold.
Amethyst is a mineral, and an onyx is a rock. It's not a mineral because it doesn't have crystalline structure.
Yeah, okay.
It's petrified pitch, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Petrified pitch. What is it? What is it?
onyx is a
black.
stone, it's black.
Stone?
Yeah.
No, amethyst.
It doesn't have
Amethyst.
crystalline structure, so it can't be a mineral.
Anyway.
I couldn't give you a bad time during the actual proceeding, so.
He's getting that. He knows that with degree in geology, but it's been 30 years.
I was cleaning
All right.
tables.
Thank you.
My husband's.
All right, moving on to Riverfront Architectural Guidelines Recommendation. New sign at First Street, 298.
Gone.
Do-do-do.
I like it.
Me too.
Well, looks like we're already. You just want to know the rest of it.
Make a motion, we accepted it, looks really.
I want to talk about it.
You wanna
Of
talk
course you
about
do.
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Do we need staff to begin their report?
You got Jacob?
I forgot this was on the list.
Yeah.
But I do remember looking at it and talking to Jenny about it. I don't think we found any issues with it. The only thing that kind of came up was the guidelines talk about using a standard font, not something that's faddish. And that was the one thing that came to mind. Well, God, is this an appropriate font? It's not too crazy. It's kind of old school Western. But that's the one thing that kind of came to my mind when I was looking at the standards.
Let me tell you what came to my mind. I love it. I mean, at first blush, I thought it was great because it sort of is something that you see in older sections of communities. So I thought it was great, and then I got to thinking, you know, we're talking about the Riverfront District as being unified. And I remember how much trouble and how much fighting there was over the sign for the insurance agency right at the corner. As far as the size of the lettering and the style. And then I drove down First Street, and I visually saw all the signs that we have on the various buildings. Most of them are on the windows. Some of them are over the door fronts. This would be the first one that was actually hanging. And I think it's great. I think it would be great as an identifying mark for the riverfront community. But it's out of place. It's out of place today because this would be the only one. And unless you're going to change the design for all of the other buildings in the district, it's going to be out of place. There's no tying, you know, we've tried to tie in as best as we could the various styles of identifying marks for each of the buildings.
Center.
But this would be so different than everything else because it was not flat against the building. It wasn't on a window. It wasn't over top of a doorway. It was hanging outside.
The bistro hangs out.
Yeah, yeah.
Is the doorway still on the corner?
Bistro one hangs around, just around the corner.
Oh,
Yeah.
but that's, but that wasn't on First Street. I didn't
So,
Is that
Think about
doorway
that.
still
Strand.
on,
Yeah, it's on Strand, yeah.
still on the corner?
Yeah.
so when I'm looking at signage, what I wanna know is it easy to see and understand? It is easy to see and understand, and I therefore don't understand quite why we would worry about it.
Well, because we've made such a, I mean, in most districts, it wouldn't probably matter. But when you get into the riverfront district, because of the oldness and, you know, you want to, I mean, there's been so much talk about tying everything together as best we could without making existing businesses conform and, you know, they make a change. You know, that was really the main reason I brought it up, is because, and I didn't realize about the bistro, that, you know, there are no other buildings on First Street that have that style.
And we're gonna encourage it.
So it meets all the standards though, right?
Yeah, the only thing that came to mind was the font. And if you think the font is fine, you know, I don't know if I have a strong opinion, but that was just the one thing that came to mind.
Is it out there now?
No.
No, they have to, we have to approve it.
I did find an error
What
in your thing.
bothered me was the busyness of the rope effect around the inner sign. Clean that up and makes it much simpler.
I'm
And it's
okay with
all
that.
Black and red.
It'll probably read better when it's in real life.
The writing in
I hope so.
it's gonna be legible.
And it's not too bright of a light color, and so it's gonna
Yeah,
blend
it's not
in.
illuminated,
No.
I think they've done
It's,
and it's over the door.
it sticks out in the corner, so
So-
traffic will see it both ways.
So Jacob, one thing that
The river.
stands out to me is that, I think that sign's a great sign, but then you call the other thing a lotto sign. That's in Washington State. I don't think we have a lotto here. But, and it's an ugly sign. It's a lottery sign. It just doesn't fit anything.
It's existing. It's actually, we permitted it back in 20-something,
I know.
2008 or something.
That's the only problem I have.
Years
So it gets
ago.
to stay.
Is that lottery a lighted sign?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is it?
People that have Washington Lotto there.
He's gonna have lottery there.
Come on.
Should.
Quit picking on us, Dan.
Be nice if they did after they have the sign over there.
Okay, what do we do?
Well, considering the fact that it's already down Old Town, I'll make a motion that we approve it.
I'll second it.
Second, moved and seconded. All in favor of the sign that's been put before us?
Aye.
Plymouth?
Aye.
Opposed? None. It is approved. Okay. CLG Historic Preservation Grant Selection Criteria.
So last meeting, we looked at the criteria that we had used several times in the past, even when we had a dedicated Historic Landmarks Commission, when we first developed the scoring sheet. And so we had some discussion about some other standards. And when we looked at that, the point system was a weird number. So we added what we discussed last month, and then we recalibrated the points. So instead of being like 57 or whatever the number was, it's 30 points, and then the points possible all changed accordingly. The reason we're putting this before you now is we don't want to be talking about this when we have a grant and, you're looking at the applications. That's, we want to be ignorant of the applications when we're developing the selection criteria. We just wanted to put this draft in front of you to make sure you're okay with it.
And since there were 3 members absent last time, we are applying to get approximately $11,500 through the state to award as a historic preservation grant this summer. And so this would be the criteria for when we get a number of projects in, that we would score them and rank them. So you guys will be doing the scoring and the ranking. So I want to make sure that these criteria make sense. And last month we added a criteria about whether or not the applicant provided proof of the financial resources to match the grant, because there's a matching requirement. It's a 1-to-1 match. And then whether or not they can complete the project within the time frame allotted. Somehow those were not criteria, and we felt like that was a good thing to make sure before we give them money.
I think those are very good.
Yeah.
Good there.
So financial aptitude and timeliness.
Very
Yeah.
important.
So
Those are the bottom 2.
but you want us to approve changes? That-
No, this is what,
Well, we
What
want to make sure you're cool
was
with
there-
this.
Was
Yeah.
there was changes from something else? that-
Yes.
Yes, we just added the bottom two, and we made all of the points add to 30. Before they added to like 60 something, and there was just all this wiggle room.
So you reduce some of the numbers then
Yeah.
on some of them,
Right,
Too gray area.
so you can.
but we kept like kind of the percentage of what each one kind of was worth.
The financial resource one should be 2. It's a yes or a no. Where's the middle ground there?
no, that's how many points.
I know.
Oh, I
but-
see what you're saying. It should be like a pass-fail.
Yeah. I mean, so they marked down a 2 over there where a 3 does what?
Sure. I think it's up to the reviewer. So if they provided a bid, one bid, for example, versus an applicant who provided lots of bids, they provided a bank statement that shows they have the money available, or they have a history of completing projects in the past with us. I mean, there's a number of ways
Okay.
to develop.
More sure, not less sure.
Yeah, exactly. If you're super sure and confident that they're gonna complete it, then you give them a 3. If you're like, I don't really know, 2.
Yeah, lukewarm 1 or 2, or man, this person
Yeah.
doesn't have a clue, 0.
Or if they provided nothing, 0.
So what's with this numbering system? What's the criteria for giving them one? How many points is good?
The against all other points?
Yeah,
Not the
so
30,
we're
they
gonna
don't-
get.
Just comparatively.
I mean, it would be great if we have 5 projects to look at. We might only have 2. We might only have 3.
It'll just be comparative though.
Yes.
Okay, so like if they get 25, then they're not gonna get the grant.
No, when we first developed this,
I can't remember.
many years ago, and this predates all of you because none of you were on the dedicated Historic Landmarks Commission. Al was, and so were you on that?
I was.
Okay, so when we first started the CLG grant, we didn't have a scoring method, and we quickly developed it. So we had an impartial method for the group to determine who gets the award, and so we developed the scoring. And this is similar to what we do with staff when we, like the TGM grant, for example. We have consultants give us a presentation and we score it, and whoever gets the highest score wins. So it's just a way of quantifying things for the sake of fairness and things of that nature. Okay. And, the CLG cycle is every 2 years. Last time we used it on City Hall to redo the grouting. And so obviously,
You saw the points.
yeah, so it's been a while since we've talked about this. Probably 4 years.
This is the first time we've done one big job instead of 3 or 4 small ones.
And that's correct. And before that, when we did do these, we had three or so.
There was no amount criteria. And so people could turn in things that were $2,000 or $10,000. And so then we scored them all and then decided how many people we could give money to. So this will be the first time that we're going to look for a project for the sum total. So that might create some challenge because you're looking at a $20,000 project instead of a $5,000 project.
So the reason we're doing one project is because the reporting became more of a pain in the patootie than it was in the past. And when I was managing it, I didn't have to deal with it. But since Jenny has taken that over, she did, and she tells me that it's a big pain in the patootie, but we want to stick with one project.
Which makes sense.
So it'll make our lives easier. It'll just everybody will be vying for this one pass-through grant award.
Well, hopefully, when we had some of those projects cost that much, they just didn't get as much money.
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it'll be better per project.
I think so.
So do you need a motion?
No.
No, we just want to make sure you're not giving us frowny faces. We want you to be aware of it. Okay. We want to make sure we vet it with you before we start advertising and start receiving awards. And since we discussed it last time, we thought it was timely to bring this to you now.
So they'll answer the criteria on each one of these?
You will.
So they're not going to see this?
They can have a copy of this public.
Okay.
Public record.
Yeah, totally. They'll know how
know
to
exactly
prepare
what-
their application to fit this.
So this is also going to be, and Jenny's idea was to make this the scoring sheet too. So if we had the applications tonight, you would have 4 copies of this page.
That's good.
And it was intended to award projects that are very public facing. So like if you have a project that's a residential project versus the Columbia Theater, for example, I would hope that this score sheet would allow you to score a public facing theater project that would have more impact to preserve versus a residential product that's just replacing a roof, for example.
But there's definitions about primary contributing, secondary contributing. There's definitions that are clarified when they apply.
She's talking about this criteria right here. This is kind of a confusing one if you've never dealt with the historic district before.
But it doesn't say there's no score here for public or private though.
I meant like visible when I said public, not like publicly owned versus privately
Visual
owned.
impact.
Yeah,
score.
and front facade versus side facade.
Oh, I see.
And then positive economic impact is kind of meant to be that criteria where you can say, okay, a theater is going to have a better impact than a home.
Well, they just won the Main Street grant.
If they get the Main Street grant.
It still has to go on, but.
Yes, they did get,
Yeah.
yeah.
Know that. Okay.
Yeah.
So are we done? Are we happy with us? Are we smiling enough?
Yeah, if
it's good,
FYI, I don't see frowny faces, so I think
All right.
we're
good
good.
to spend time
Okay.
on this sometimes.
Okay, acceptance agenda planning.
So moved.
Second.
Oh, okay, all in favor?
All right.
Opposed? Okay, approved. Planning director decisions. A through E.
You didn't have to do anything without that.
Okay,
What's that, just a question, the subdivision final plat of Elk Meadows? But Elk Ridge?
Elk Ridge
Estates?
Estate Phase 6.
The top thing they've been working on for a while?
Yeah,
Or another thing.
the first time the planning commission gave preliminary plat approval for that was in 2013.
Yeah.
Been a while.
The person they had, and infrastructure was already in place.
Yeah.
The problem is the person they had working on it was slow. How slow can you go? Not much slower than Ridgecrest. But they're finally.
I know, I was gonna ask about that, like, how much longer they're gonna be filming and moving stuff around.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Over the development over by the DMV.
Oh yes.
Oh,
They're in some hot water with DEQ right now.
Oh, good.
We won't,
Better them.
we won't say who turned them in.
no.
I mean that project's still going, but they have some things to take care of.
Watch yourself.
All right.
Well, they got in a big hurry, and we all saw testimony here of the neighbors.
yeah.
So it wasn't a secret
Yeah.
Yeah.
that people were upset with what they were doing. We saw testimony, we heard testimony in city council, that people are like, why is the city allowing this to happen, what's going on? So it wasn't a secret that they were trumping on some of the rules.
That's
They-
why I was asking about it though, is because it seems.
They had a DEQ 1200C permit, and they said they were putting in all the erosion control. They just didn't do it.
They
Nothing.
said the right
Absolutely
things and they did the wrong thing.
And the
They had a plan.
1200C was for one property, not other properties like the Foursquare Church property.
Yeah.
Or adjacent wetlands.
Terrible.
Or, I have a question about that, though. I think I can ask this question. So, carefully ask this question. Adjacent, not necessarily adjacent wetlands, but adjacent buffer. That was a mitigation for buffer impact for this Foursquare Church. Is that correct?
Yeah, I looked at it. When we did that, I took pictures because basically what we were trying to do back then was capture that tree line. And the tree line hasn't changed. I compared the pictures I took in 2009 from what is there today.
So the intention was within the trees, that mitigation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't think they violated the intent of that. In fact, I talked to Pastor Cook, who was the pastor back then, about it this morning. I've also talked to DEQ about it. There was concern
I know.
that they looked at that, and I went out and checked it, and I that wasn't an issue. I mean, that was one of the first things I thought of. Oh man, I sure hope they didn't mess
Well,
that up.
The wetland delineation is 10 years old too, so it isn't necessarily not wetland, but anyway.
All right.
I just have one other question though.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The lot line adjustments, Scholl and Schlumberger, that's that
Mm-hmm.
development up on top of
Yeah,
the rock.
yeah, that was the right-of-way vacation.
The one that we approved, it's just finally going through.
After a couple, so the vacation is finally finalized, and then once that was finalized, I was able to get the decision out for the lot line adjustments, which was one of the things they wanted to do, and they're up there. They got some of the road in, they got some of the power poles in, and
There you go.
working away.
Good to see that property
Progress.
getting used.
Yeah. Planning Department activity reports.
That's what we were just talking about.
We just did that.
Oh,
Okay.
no, that's this thing.
Oh,
You're
no,
right.
I'm moving on.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Activity reports.
Oh, we have another work session for the Riverfront Connect. I'm just kidding.
Tell you what, you can be
We're outta
there.
here.
I'm not going to be there.
Denny, do we have anything further on Sand Island?
What's the incentive for us to actually come to the meeting?
You're $30.
I do think we're done with, so this was the last Housing Needs Analysis Advisory Committee meeting.
For them.
Thank,
For, I mean, obviously we're working on code amendments and all that stuff. But I think it's the last 6 o'clocker we'll be asking you to attend for the foreseeable future. So I know we had a lot of those. And I know you just asked about the Sand Island, so I started.
Council saw a draft proposal last meeting and made corrections, but it's still going back and forth. Just trying to make sure we are being good stewards of the public good. Just making sure that we've covered all the bases and as best you can, because there's always people out there doing bad stuff, but we try to push them far enough and they push us far enough that we end up in the middle, hopefully.
Okay.
So we're hoping for this camping season.
Move we adjourn. Who seconds the motion? Okay, everybody in favor of adjourning? Oh, you did you? Okay, we adjourn. We are adjourned. This meeting at 9:24.